In a world where refrigeration is common, the Amish community stands out by thriving without the steady hum of modern appliances. They have perfected the craft of food preservation, using tried-and-true methods passed down through generations. From kitchens alive with activity to quiet pantries filled with carefully stored foods, the Amish demonstrate that tradition and creativity go hand in hand. For the Amish, storing food without refrigeration isn't a survival tactic or a challenge for a reality TV show. It's just how they live. One of their best-kept secrets? Good old-fashioned water bath canning. If you've ever seen shelves packed with jars of pickles, peaches, or tomatoes, you've witnessed the magic of this method in action. At first glance, it may seem simple. Place food in jars, boil them, and call it done. But let me tell you, this is no beginner's project. When I tried canning peaches at home, I ended up with a sticky mess, unsealed jars, and a quick realization that I might not be prepared for an off-the-grid lifestyle. The Amish, on the other hand, have this down to a science. They meticulously wash and prepare each jar, filling it with fruits, vegetables, or sauces, and then lower it into boiling water, almost like sending it on a deep-sea voyage. The heat kills off bacteria and mold that could spoil the food. Once sealed, these jars can sit safely on shelves for years. It's like time traveling with food. What you eat in 2034 could be the tomatoes you preserved this summer. Some canned foods even keep fresh for 5 years or more, as long as the seal holds tight. Honestly, the hardest part isn't the boiling or the timing. It's resisting the urge to open a jar early and dive in. When I asked my grandma about canning, she gave me a look as if to say, "You don't know how to do this?" For the Amish, canning is a skill honed like an art form, creating a stockpile for lean times or when winter storms make shopping trips impossible. Instead of rushing to the store, they simply open a jar of home-canned potatoes and start cooking. And the taste? That's the best part. Unlike frozen veggies, which can get mushy, canned foods retain their flavor. There's something nostalgic about the crunch of an Amish pickle or the sweetness of a canned peach that tastes like a little piece of summer in the middle of winter, all without a single fridge. Maybe that's why this method has endured. No electricity costs, no concerns about power outages spoiling food, and no fussing with temperature settings. Just jars, boiling water, and skills passed from one generation to the next. Of course, canning isn't without its challenges. If you've ever tried opening a stubborn jar lid, you'll know what I mean. Last year, I canned some salsa and sealed it so tightly that I needed 2 people and a jar opener to get it open. My neighbor joked that I should market it as tamper-proof salsa and charge extra. But that's the nature of water bath canning. It's both a method of food preservation and a practice in patience. To get the timing just right for canning, precision is key. If the jars aren't sealed perfectly, they won't keep. And if you think twisting the lid tighter will fix it, well, good luck with that. At least the Amish don't deal with guests fussing over Best Buy dates. If it's in the pantry, it's ready to use. And what about the ash left behind after a fire dies out? For the Amish, that ash isn't waste. It's an effective way to keep food fresh. Storing eggs in ash might sound like a mishap, but it's actually an intentional method. Long before refrigeration, people found that a layer of clean, dry ash could keep food preserved and pests away. It's not just clever, it's almost scientific. Ash is alkaline, creating an environment that bacteria don't thrive in, meaning no bacteria, no spoilage. It's a bit ironic when you think about it. Most of us see ash and think, messy cleanup. The Amish, though, see it as the ideal solution for egg storage. Eggs are placed in containers packed with ash, each one tucked away like a little treasure to be uncovered months later. And it's not just eggs. Root vegetables like carrots and beets can also be stored in ash, giving them a protective coat to keep them fresh without sprouting or turning soft over the winter months. Patience is essential here, and the Amish have plenty of it. If you bury food too soon or use damp ash, you're bound for trouble. My own first attempt at storing eggs in ash felt like a clumsy science project rather than a preservation method. I went overboard with the ash, packing the eggs in so thickly that I could barely find them afterward without creating a mess all over my kitchen. Lesson learned: moderation is key. It's also important to note that not just any ash will work. It has to be from clean, untreated wood. Ash from scented logs or treated wood just won't do. The Amish understand this because they've perfected the art of simplicity, similar to how someone makes a flawless pie crust without even measuring. Ash has been quietly used for preservation for centuries. Even the ancient Romans relied on it. Today, it's still in use by those who appreciate slow, thoughtful methods. It makes you wonder, why aren't more of us trying these time-tested techniques? While most of us use fire ashes for roasting marshmallows or burning old receipts, the Amish have discovered a way to turn leftover ash into a powerful tool for food preservation. And wouldn't it be great if this preservation trick worked on other things, like our aching joints? If I could bury my knees in ash to stop them from creaking every time I stand up, I'd be all in. But sadly, ash works its magic only on veggies and eggs. A gentle reminder from nature that while we can preserve food, the best we can do for ourselves might just be a bit of yoga. Once you get the hang of storing food in ash, it's easy to see why the Amish have kept this practice for generations. It's affordable, effective, and has the bonus of baffling anyone who sees eggs nestled in a bin of ash in your home. Explain it to them, and they might look at you like you're a little odd. But when their store-bought eggs spoil and your ash-preserved ones are still fresh, they'll be asking you for the secret. Now imagine a world where butter isn't just a spread, but a preservation superhero. While most of us focus on spill-proof storage for leftovers, the Amish have perfected a technique using nothing more than fat. When cooked meat is immersed in melted lard or tallow, it forms an airtight seal that keeps bacteria out, essentially creating a natural Tupperware. And it works with a variety of meats. Bacon, sausage, and even duck have been kept fresh in fat baths for months. The first time I tried sealing a roast in lard, I felt like a contestant on a survival show. But 2 months later, when I opened the jar, the meat was so tender, you'd think it had been pampered. My family, though, needed convincing. They looked at the meat with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Are we really eating this?" they asked. I assured them it was safe, though I can't say they were fully convinced. The science behind fat sealing is simple but brilliant. With no oxygen to fuel spoilage, bacteria can't grow, so the food stays safe for months, even longer if kept in a cool spot. This method isn't just about survival, it's about flavor too. The fat traps in moisture, so the food often tastes better with time. Think of it like marinating, but with an endless shelf life. And here's a fun tidbit. The French have used this method for ages, calling it confit. If it's good enough for French chefs, it's good enough for anyone. Best of all, it's simple. No special equipment required, just a jar, some fat, and a little patience. But take it from me, make sure to strain the fat well, or you might find unexpected bits in your food. There's nothing like biting into a tender piece of meat only to find a rogue, crispy crumb. And speaking of old-school techniques, fermentation isn't just a hip trend from the farmer's market. The Amish have been doing it long before kombucha became popular with the yoga crowd. Fermentation holds a cherished place in Amish kitchens, where it's not just a trend but a tradition, preserving foods naturally while packing them with flavor. The beauty of fermented foods lies in their simplicity. Let nature take over, and you're rewarded with vegetables that can outlast just about anything, even picky relatives. Through fermentation, sauerkraut, pickles, and beets are transformed as natural bacteria feed on sugars, turning ordinary produce into tangy, long-lasting staples. But if you think fermentation is as easy as throwing cabbage in a jar and waiting, think again. It's a delicate process. Let it sit too long, and your sauerkraut might develop a smell potent enough to clear out a family reunion. Don't leave it long enough, and you're left with limp cabbage in brine, a far cry from delicious. The key is finding the right balance, allowing beneficial bacteria to thrive before the harmful ones take hold. When I tried making sauerkraut for the first time, I boasted to everyone that I was tapping into my inner pioneer. What I didn't expect was the smell. Imagine opening a jar only to have your kitchen hit with an odor reminiscent of an old gym bag, though this one might actually be edible. I stuck with it, though, And a few weeks later, when I opened it again, I found some of the crunchiest, most flavorful kraut I'd ever tasted. My cat, however, avoided the kitchen for days. What makes fermentation so fascinating is the science behind it. No electricity or fancy equipment is needed, just a process that's as ancient as civilization itself. Archaeologists have found evidence of food fermentation as far back as 9,000 years ago. So some ancient ancestor may have been snacking on fermented foods while building the pyramids. If it worked for them, it definitely works for the Amish. Fermented foods are truly the gift that keeps on giving. They can last for years on the shelf, and their flavors only improve over time. It's like food that ages gracefully. The first taste is great, but wait a few months and it's even better. One tip, though: always label your jars. I once forgot to label mine and mixed up sauerkraut with pickled beets. Let's just say the surprise when expecting one and tasting the other is unforgettable. Fermentation isn't just a method for preserving food. It's a practice steeped in tradition. And yes, it's a culture, pun fully intended. It's about more than just keeping food fresh. It's a way of connecting with a time-tested, natural process, preserving both food and tradition for the long haul. When you're fermenting and preserving food the old-fashioned way, you're capturing a bit of history in every jar. The Amish have been doing this for generations, passing down the skills like they pass down recipes or heirloom quilts. No Wi-Fi, no fridges, just jars, salt, and plenty of patience. This approach also packs a serious nutritional punch. Without a single preservative or chemical, these fermented foods contain probiotics that can rival the ones you'll find in pricey health store bottles. And if you grew up hearing, "eat your vegetables," the Amish have found a clever loophole. Ferment them, and suddenly, you'll want to eat them. Take dried food, for example. While many of us think of jerky as a quick snack from the gas station, the Amish approach it as a true survival skill. Long before electric dehydrators, they relied on the sun and wood ovens to remove moisture from fruits, vegetables, and meats. Less moisture means less chance for mold or bacteria, allowing these foods to stay good for years, sometimes even decades if stored properly. Ever tried a sun-dried apple that's been around for over a decade? It's still surprisingly tasty, though perhaps a little on the dry side, like a grandparent's old jokes. On a visit to an Amish family's home, I noticed shelves filled with jars of dried apples, pears, and even venison strips, looking like they could last forever. "When you've got 7 kids to feed," the father explained, "you learn to make food last, or you'll run out fast. And believe me, those kids were quick to get to the food." What's amazing is that, with the right conditions, dried foods can last up to 20 years. Imagine finding a forgotten jar of dried tomatoes tucked at the back of a cupboard, older than your teenager, and still perfectly edible. It's not just about surviving tough times either. Drying food saves space and weight, which is why dried fruits and meats became essential for farmers, travelers, and even astronauts. Yes, NASA actually took cues from these age-old drying methods when planning meals for space missions. Once, inspired to try my own hand at drying food, I laid apple slices on a wooden tray in the sun, feeling like a pioneer. A few hours later, I came back to find the tray empty, with my neighbor's dog sitting there, licking his lips. Lesson learned. The Amish have the know-how, and I probably need a better setup for next time. The Amish know that drying food is only half the battle. The other half is storing it properly. Achieving the right balance is crucial. Leave too much moisture, and mold will make itself at home faster than relatives after a lottery win. Dry it out too much, and it turns into a rock-hard snack, not exactly edible. Ever tried biting into jerky that could double as a building material in a pinch? If the apocalypse comes, that jerky might be more useful as a brick. The Amish have also mastered drying meats in wood-fired ovens. It's not just practical, it's aromatic. Stepping into a room with meat drying is like walking into a rustic bistro where the specialty is survival. And dried meat wasn't just for emergencies. It was an all-day energy boost, something to chew on while tending to fields or building barns. Who needs energy drinks when there's dried venison to keep you going? If you think treasure means gold coins, you're missing out. To the Amish, A well-stocked root cellar filled with potatoes, apples, and carrots is worth more than a chest of jewels. Root cellars are nature's refrigerators, with no hum or worry of a power outage. Tucked underground, these spaces stay cool, dark, and just damp enough to keep produce fresh through the coldest winters. Ever wonder why root vegetables seem immune to spoilage? They thrive in root cellars, where temperatures remain steady regardless of the weather outside. Root cellars regulate moisture levels and cool the air, which helps prevent spoilage, like a vigilant hall monitor guarding the shelves. The first time I visited one, it felt like stumbling into a farmer's version of Narnia. Walls lined with bins of potatoes and rows of shiny apples, like treasures waiting to be picked. This ancient storage technique dates back over 2,000 years. Romans used underground pits to store food, though Caesar might have swapped his laurel wreath for a stash of those fresh, crunchy carrots that the Amish put away. Here's the real gem. Those apples stored in root cellars actually taste better after a few months. They soften just enough, and the flavors mellow out like a fine wine, without the hangover the next day. On a personal note, walking into a root cellar feels like stepping into an old library, minus the books, but with way more turnips. There's something uniquely satisfying about knowing that all that food will last, without requiring a single drop of electricity. It's also a bit of a workout. Trust me, hauling buckets of apples up and down those cellar stairs will make you think twice before complaining about carrying grocery bags. I once volunteered to help a friend load their cellar for winter, thinking it would only take a couple of hours. By the end, I had lugged so many pumpkins my biceps were practically begging for a union. But it's not all hard work. Root cellars become places of community, too. People stop by to swap tips, trade produce, and share a good laugh about how the old turnips in the corner look fresher than most of us on Monday mornings. One elderly Amish man once told me that the secret to happiness is keeping your root vegetables well-stocked and your neighbors wondering how you do it. Now let's talk about salt. Not just for seasoning your fries, but for its centuries-old role as a food protector. In fact, entire economies were built around salt, and the Romans even paid their soldiers with it. No wonder the Amish keep this ancient preservation technique alive. When you pack food in enough salt, you're not just enhancing the flavor, you're waging war on spoilage. The Amish salt everything from meats to fish, layering the food inside barrels of coarse salt until it looks like a snowbank. Salt doesn't just draw out moisture, it locks it out completely. Without moisture, bacteria can't survive, and the food stays preserved. Some salted fish can last for decades. Yes, you read that right. This method predates refrigeration and probably has more staying power than any of my New Year's resolutions. I once decided to try salting a ham, thinking, how difficult could it really be? Spoiler, it was harder than a calculus exam. First, the salt ended up everywhere, between my fingers, under my nails, and somehow even in my shoes. Then, I seriously underestimated how heavy a fully salted ham would be. Ever tried wrestling with a slippery, brined piece of pork? It's like trying to carry a toddler in the middle of a tantrum. But in the end, the ham lasted, and it tasted delicious. The only downside? I'm still finding salt crystals scattered around the kitchen. Salt curing food isn't for the faint of heart. It requires patience and an absurd amount of salt. But when done properly, it rewards you with meat that tastes like it just came off the smoker, even years later. Pickles, however, are more than just a sandwich accompaniment. They're the unsung heroes of food preservation. The Amish have mastered the use of vinegar to keep foods edible long after their expiration dates. It's kind of genius. What starts as a humble cucumber can end up outlasting the bread it was supposed to sit on. That's the power of vinegar. When foods are soaked in this sour solution, they become impervious to bacteria, much like secret agents who always find a way to escape. The Amish pickle everything, from cucumbers to eggs, beets, and even onions. Who knew that vinegar could double as both a salad dressing and a preservation powerhouse? Pickling isn't exactly a new concept. Historians say the ancient Mesopotamians were pickling long before Caesar had the idea to conquer anything. But the Amish? They've perfected it. Here's a surprising fact. An unopened jar of vinegar-pickled food can stay good for over 5 years. That kind of shelf life really puts modern expiration dates to shame. When I made my first batch of pickles at home, I quickly learned a tough lesson. One wrong move with the salt to vinegar ratio, and you either get food that could strip paint off your walls or pickles that are softer than old chewing gum. My family bravely tasted the first batch, but let's just say they've politely avoided my pickling endeavors ever since. There's something strangely poetic about a jar of pickled eggs, those creamy whites floating serenely, patiently waiting for their big moment. They're like the food version of an old friend, reliable, unchanging, and always ready to surprise you at a potluck. If I were a cucumber, I'd definitely sign up to be pickled too. Who wouldn't want to live forever in a jar? It's fascinating how these simple, time-tested methods make modern gadgets seem almost unnecessary. Just when you think you've seen it all, the Amish come up with yet another ageless trick. When you think of smoked foods, you might imagine backyard barbecues or festive holiday meals, but for the Amish, smoking is a smart way to keep meats fresh and tasty for longer. Smoking isn't just about flavor, it's also a preservation technique that stood the test of time. As the smoke envelops the food, it creates a protective layer that helps prevent bacteria from forming. This is why smoking has been a key method in Amish food storage for generations. The process starts with selecting high-quality cuts of meat or fish, which are then hung in a smokehouse to absorb all the rich, smoky flavor while they dry. The smoke contains compounds that inhibit bacterial growth, extending the shelf life of the food. Done correctly, smoked meats can last up to 2 years. That's like having a premium delicacy ready for a family feast or surprise guest at any moment. And while you might first think of hams and sausages, the Amish smoke much more than that. Fish and cheeses, too. Imagine pulling a chunk of smoked cheddar from your pantry, delicious and ready to serve. The art of smoking food goes back thousands of years. Early civilizations figured out that not only did smoking enhance flavor, but it also made meat last much longer. Talk about a win-win. I recall my first attempt at smoking chicken wings. Full of excitement, I had smoke billowing and meat sizzling. But when I finally bit into a wing, I realized I'd gone a little overboard with the spices. My taste buds were in full revolt, and all I wanted was a simple, tasty meal. It's a reminder that while smoking can be an art, balancing the flavors is just as crucial as getting the technique right. That's why smoking is such a mainstay in Amish food preservation. It's a skill passed down through generations, ensuring flavorful meals that have stood the test of time. Herbs aren't just for seasoning your mashed potatoes. They're also a powerful ally in the battle against spoilage. While most of us might picture dried herbs on a kitchen spice rack, for the Amish, those dried bundles are a secret survival tool. Herbs like rosemary and thyme are naturally antimicrobial, making them perfect for preserving food. Instead of letting these greens wilt in the fridge, the Amish dry them and hang them from the ceiling, where they wait to enhance soups, stews, and more. You might be surprised to learn that thyme has a history that dates back to ancient Egypt, where it was used to preserve mummies. So when you add thyme to your beef stew, you're tapping into a preservation method that's been keeping food fresh for thousands of years. It's like having a culinary bodyguard in your spice cabinet. In Amish kitchens, dried herbs do double duty. They bring flavor and help preserve food for longer. Imagine a hearty winter stew simmering on the stove, filled with vegetables from last summer's harvest and herbs that were dried months ago. That's the kind of meal that warms you up and keeps you going on a cold day. I once tried drying oregano from my garden, thinking I'd have enough to season meals for months. However, my cat had different plans. Every time I turned around, he was sneaking off with a leaf or two, treating my oregano like catnip. Lesson learned. Maybe I should have hung it higher or set up a cat guard. The Amish approach to drying herbs isn't just practical. It's a testament to their respect for nature and its gifts. They make the most out of what they have, ensuring nothing goes to waste. That bundle of thyme hanging from the kitchen ceiling isn't just a spice. It's a symbol of resourcefulness and creativity, essential traits in their everyday life. While many of us head to the store for fresh herbs that wilt quickly, the Amish have perfected the art of preservation. They turn herbs into pantry staples that not only add flavor to meals, but also keep them safe. Like a trusty jar of pickles, Dried herbs are part of the Amish toolkit for thriving without a fridge. Once again, innovation often comes in unexpected forms, with a side of humor and a dash of history. For most of us, the thought of a fridge breakdown is panic-inducing, but the Amish simply shrug and carry on. Their food storage methods have kept them thriving for generations, proving that with creativity, tradition, and a little salt, you don't need modern appliances to live well. Imagine opening a jar of homemade pickles, the satisfying crunch, the tang. There's nothing quite like it. I once tried to impress my friends with my own batch of pickles, but let's just say they were a little too experimental. It's all part of the process, right? Even when our pickling attempts fail, they add to the charm of home preservation. And wouldn't it be great if we could store memories as easily as the Amish store vegetables? Think about those family gatherings filled with laughter, shared recipes, and the fun chaos of cooking together. We could all use more of that in our lives.